So now let's talk about aspects. So if we look around the sky in a 360-degree circle across the night sky, we will divide that out into our 12 signs that we already covered. So we have 12 signs out of 360 degrees equals 30 degrees per sign. So if we look at that on a chart, that means if we use whole sign houses, in other words, every sign occupies an entire house, then now we're going to have 30 degrees within each particular sign. So a planet, for example, let's say the sun, would move from over here at 0 degrees and gradually move up here all the way up to 30 degrees. Now obviously if it's in the middle, then now it's going to be at 15 degrees. So we call that 15 degrees of Libra. So it would be 15 degrees of Libra. And so that's what it means when you see 15 degrees of Libra, is that that planet is in the exact middle of the sign. Now obviously it's going to be continually moving, so it's not going to stay there. It's going to gradually go up and up into the next sign, at the next sign, etc., until it makes a full circle around the chart. So an aspect would be the angular relationship between two different planets. For example, right here you could have 40, 50 degrees, let's say 45 degrees, for example. So what that is you have an empty space here, which would constitute 30 degrees. And then let's say the sun is at 15 degrees. So now you would have 15 degrees to get to the next sign, which in here would be Pisces. So now to get to the moon, let's say the moon was at exactly 15 degrees. Then we would need 15 more degrees to get to the moon. So basically, for this particular relationship, we would have 15 degrees to get to the next sign, plus 30 degrees to skip the next sign entirely, plus 15 degrees to get to the moon. So the angular relationship between these two would be 60 degrees. So a 60-degree differential angle between these two is called a sextile. And that basically means that there's one whole house or one whole sign, in assuming you're using whole sign houses, in between these two signs. So a sextile is considered good, and that is a good angular relationship between the two planets. Now obviously it's not going to be exactly 60 degrees. I mean, we could have a situation to where, let's say the sun, for example, is over here, and let's say the moon is up there. So in that particular case, you're looking at, let's say maybe the sun is at 20 degrees and the moon is at 10 degrees. So that means we would have 10 degrees to make the rest of the sign. Then we would have a 30 degree in between. And then right here, obviously, we would have a 10-degree difference to get to the moon. So now we have 10 degrees plus 30 degrees plus 10 degrees. It's going to equal 50 degrees instead of 60 degrees. So that's not an exact sextile or an exact 60-degree angle between the two planets. So if we look at the two differences between these degrees, we have 20 degrees minus 10 degrees. So we have a 10-degree differential. Now that is called an orb. An orb is basically an area surrounding the planet of degrees, or the differential degrees in between the two planets. So we have a 10-degree orb. Now, varying texts or varying books will tell you to adjust the orb based upon sort of, the relationship. So if it's a sextile, it's going to be, for example, an 8-degree orb would be something that we're concerned about. So maybe a sextile would be, let's say, an 8-degree orb. And then an opposition, for example, would be maybe higher at 12 degrees or something like this. So you have a differential in orbs that you are concerned about based upon the relationship between the two planets. So from what I'm seeing, the consensus out of most books is a conjunction, for example, that's the angular relationship, would be a 10-degree differential, sextile, 6 degrees square, 8 degrees, trine, 8 degrees, and opposition, 10 degrees. So let's see what that looks like. So if we have the sun and the moon here, and we have a sextile, we go back to our cheat sheet, and we're looking at sextile would be a 6-degree difference. So are we concerned about it or not? In this particular case, it looks like a 10-degree difference. So 10-degree difference, we would not be concerned about it. Now, obviously, these planets are continually moving. So this is going to be moving this direction, and this one's going to be moving this direction. At some point, they'll come closer and closer, assuming that the sun is faster than the moon, which it's not. So if we do this the opposite way, for example, so now the moon is going to be moving faster, so it eventually will catch up. So the point at which it catches up is an exact angle or an exact aspect. So let's say that we have, so now let's say we have an exact aspect between these two of 60 degrees. An exact aspect is considered powerful, is extremely powerful compared to, let's say, a non-aspect, where one's going to be at 14 degrees, one's going to be at 15 degrees. That's getting more powerful, but when it gets to the exact aspect, in other words, both of the exact degree and minutes, that's considered the most powerful aspect that the two planets will have. Now, obviously, since both planets are going to be in motion, the exact aspect will be a relatively short period of time, depending upon the speed of both of the planets. Sun and the moon are relatively fast, so that aspect between the two will be very short. So again, that's considered the most powerful aspect when it is exact. Now, there's two types of aspects that we have. One is applying, and one is separating. So you'll see that on a variety of charts, example on screen, where you'll see that a certain aspect exists, and it'll say A or S, that's applying and separating. So applying is when that one planet is coming into the exact aspect of the other planet. So for example, let's say the moon is at 14 degrees and the sun is at 15 degrees. Since the moon is a faster planet, then it is about to be 15 degrees. It's 1 degree apart right now, so the orb right now is 1 degree, but it's about to not be 1 degree, it's shrinking. In other words, the two planets are coming into an exact aspect. They're about to be in an exact aspect, even though the orb is still 1 degree. So when they're about to be in an exact aspect, they're applying. In other words, they're coming together into this angular relationship. So that is applying. So obviously, let's say the moon is now at 16 degrees, and the sun, for imaginary purposes, it's still at 15 degrees. Now they still have an angular relationship, which is very close, right? Again, we're at a 1 degree orb, but it's a different orb because the moon is faster. It's now at a different orb. Now that they've already had the exact aspect, they're now considered to be separating. In other words, the exact aspect is past, and now we're in a situation where the moon is going to overtake basically the sun and just start moving and moving and moving, etc. So that is, so when they get an exact aspect, not on top of each other, but when they get an exact aspect, even if it's in a different sign, then that is applying. So we're applying, we're applying, we're applying. Now we have an exact aspect, and now we're separating, separating, separating. So they're still in aspect. They still have an angular relationship of a certain degree. However, they're now separating because the exact aspect has already passed. So the first aspect we have is a good aspect. Again, it's called the sextile, and that is a 60-degree differential between the two planets. So we have basically a one house difference in between them. So the sun, for example, is here. We have one blank house, which is going to be Pisces in this instance. And then we have the moon in another house. So that is going to be a 60-degree differential. So the next one is going to be a square, and that is a 90-degree differential, and that is usually encountered as red on most charts because that's considered a bad aspect. And that is when we have a two-house differential between them. So here's house number 1, and here's house number 2 in between these two planets. And again, that's a square, normally represented by a square, obviously, right? So if you have the two aspects here, then we would call that a square between these two planets. So on most software, you could look at a grid, for example, which will show you a square here. And then on other software, you can look at a line item, which will show one planet being square another planet, which looks like this. So you can see extra information on this particular thing as to what the degree is, what the house number that the planet is in, the sign the planet is in, etc., etc. And if it's retrograde, it'll also have a red on the far right-hand side. So the next angle is a trine, and a trine is a 120-degree differential between the two planets. So trine is going to basically be 1, 2, 3, or tri-3, right? Like triathlon, etc. We have 1, 2, 3 spaces or signs in between these two particular planets. And again, this is 120 degrees, and that is represented by a triangle. So here's what it looks like on a grid. You can see a trine between these two planets. And here's what it looks like on a listing. Again, you can see a trine between these two planets. And again, this is going to be from software that you pay for. It's going to be blue, most likely on wherever you're looking at. So blue is basically good, and the red are bad aspects. So what we're talking about now are major aspects. We're not talking about minor aspects for the purposes of this course, just major aspects. So that is going to be how a trine works. And it's easy to sort of see angularly how this works, right? Because we have 30 degrees in this house, 30 degrees in this house, and then so you have 90 degrees plus the 15-degree differential, and the 15-degree differential is going to give you 120 degrees. So the next one is a conjunction, which is basically that they're in the same sign. So if two planets are the same sign, then that is a conjunction. And the difference between the two planets, obviously, is going to be the angular differential between the planets. So let's say, for example, that the moon is at 15 degrees and the sun is at 20 degrees. Then we have a differential of 5 degrees. Now, if we look at our text from before, in a conjunction, we're concerned about a 10-degree differential. So again, if we look over here at a conjunction, now we have a 5 degree. So this will be something that we're interested in because it's only 5 degrees. So a 5-degree differential between these two is going to be interesting. Now, if these are way, way far apart and the sun is at, let's say, 29 degrees and the moon is at 1 degree, then we're probably not so much interested in between the two aspects. But again, they're still in the same house. It's just not an angle that we're interested in. So again, one of the things about an angular relationship between planets, right? No matter where the sun moves in the entire chart, it's always going to be in some type of angular relationship with the moon. So what we need to do is reduce the number of interesting angles, and we do that by looking only at major aspects. So we'll cover all the major aspects again at the end of this, but for now, just remember that no matter where the sun and the moon are, they're always at some type of angle. But the angles that we're interested in are only going to be things like conjunction or opposition or trine or sextile, etc., the major aspects. So lastly, we're going to have an opposition, which is considered bad. As in red, it'll appear red in most charts, and an opposition is a 180 degree relationship between the two planets. So basically across the street, right? So they're across the street from each other. That's going to be 180 degree. And an opposition looks like this on the graph, which let's look at that example here. So you can see we have an opposition between these two planets, and that is going to be on the grid if you use a grid style. And then over here, you're going to look at a listing style, and here we have an opposition between these two planets. And again, you can see which house they're in, etc., etc. And since this is a bad relationship between the two planets, then it's going to appear in red in both of them. So again, you can see A for applying, S for separating, etc., etc. Now, applying and separating will come in handy later as we start looking at different charts. But for now, you can just sort of remember A for applying, S for separating, and the orb that appears in the number. So let's wrap up major aspects. So again, if two planets are in the same chart, they're obviously going to have an angular relationship to each other. So for this purposes of this course, we're looking at just the major aspects. And that's going to be a conjunction. A conjunction is when two planets are in the same sign, right? The same sign. And a conjunction, we're interested in a 10-degree differential between those. A sextile is when they're one sign away from each other. In other words, you have one blank sign in between or one sign in between, and that is going to be 6 degrees we're concerned about at that point. So that is a sextile, and that is considered good. So conjunction is good because they're the same house. Sextile is also good. Now square is when you have two houses away and two signs away, and that is going to be 8 degrees. We're concerned if it's within 8 degrees. So again, it's not going to be 8 degrees for long. They're constantly moving. So one planet is going to be approaching the other one as far as degree-wise, or they already were exact and now they're sort of moving away, and so that is separating. So then a square is bad, and that's represented by a square. A trine, represented by the triangle, is 3 spaces away. So you have 3 gaps, 3 signs with the two planets not in them. And then, so 3 away is an 8 degrees we're concerned about once they get at that point. So an opposition is going to be across the street. That's going to be a bad angle, and we're concerned at that point with 10 degrees. So you can see sort of a pattern here. You have 6 sextile, square trine is going to be 8, and opposition and conjunction, in other words, same house or across the street, we're worried about 10 degrees. So an opposition is going to be bad. Square is going to be bad as well, and the rest are going to be good. So easy to spot in a chart when it's blue or when it's red. So it's going to be quick to sort of figure out at that point. So let's take a look at some aspects. The first one that we look at down here on the right, between Mercury and the IC. So let's take a look at that. That is going to be a square. So here is the IC, and here is Mercury. So you can see we have 1, 2 houses in between, and you remember a square is a 90-degree differential. And if we look over here, we have a square is 0 degrees and 22 minutes applying. So we have an applying aspect. So later on, it's going to be not applying, it's going to be separating. And then it's not going to be an aspect at all as things keep moving. So let's take a look at over here. We have a sextile. So let's look at the sextile. We have the sun. Then let's take a look over here at Uranus. We have the sun and Uranus. Now that's a sextile, meaning it's 1 house away or 1 sign away. So you can see that, and you remember a sextile is going to be a 60-degree difference. 60 degrees because we have 30 degrees in between here. Then we're going to have 15 and 15, so that's going to be a 60-degree difference. So you can see here that this aspect is a sextile and it's at 0 degrees. So that is very much exact, and 27 minutes, and S means it's separating. So previously, maybe a few minutes ago, the sun, well, maybe, a few minutes ago, it was 0 degrees and 0 minutes, and that was an exact aspect. But now the aspect is over, the party is gone, and we're separating. I'm sorry, but that is a sextile. So let's look over here. We have a trine. So you can see we have a trine is 1 degree and 37 minutes separating. So the exact aspect was a while back, but let's take a look at that. So here is Venus, and here is the ascendant over here. And this is a trine, meaning there's 1, 2, 3 gaps in between. And you remember a trine is 120 degrees. So we have 3 gaps and 120 degrees. So our trine right here is separating. The party is over. It's sort of separating, and soon there will be no aspect that we're concerned about. I mean, there'll be an aspect, of course. Everything in the chart will always have an angular relationship to each other, but it won't be a trine anymore. It'll just be a big gap in between. Big gap in between. So now we have more aspects, so we can follow along with these. So we have another square here. We have another sextile here. The sextile separating, and this square is separating. So you can see that aspects are listed in the proper order. In other words, what's the tightest orb? So the tightest orb is going to be north and south node, which are always, it's going to be at 0 degrees and 0 seconds. 0 minutes, not seconds. It's separating. I'm not sure why it's separating. So then we have here the minor aspects. We're not really going to worry about those. But for the most part, you can sort of see a good chart will have all the aspects listed out for you. If they're not, we can always just manually go up here and say, what's the relationship from this to this? Well, this is 27 degrees. This is 26 degrees. Are we interested in this particular sextile or not, right? So you look at that particular sextile over here, and it's already listed under here. And it is beneath a 1 degree difference. We have a 58-minute degree difference between these two. So yeah, we would be interested in those two. So you can spot it visually, or you can get a listing, either one. But either way, you still have the aspects.